All right, the big speech today by the RBA Governor Philip Lowe. Let's discuss it now with a former Reserve Bank official, a former Treasury official, and of course former economist, Chief Economist of the Prime Minister, Dr. Andrew Stone. Andrew, thank you for your time. A fair amount of criticism for how the inflation issue's been handled by the RBA. Big speech today. We're all hoping we're at the peak of the rate hikes. It doesn't seem like that, and he gave a few mixed messages on inflation. He certainly said he didn't make the promise that rates wouldn't rise until 2024. I must have heard another promise made, but I'll get your take on today.
Indeed. Well, I think it's fair to say that the Reserve Bank has got itself into a terrible mess. And it's also important to understand that this isn't just a mess created in the last year. If you read the Governor's speech, it's very much couched in the sense that nobody saw this inflation coming. A year ago, we were expecting inflation to be just normal levels. And so we've been taken by surprise and we now need to, so mistakes were made. But we just need to get it under control again. That's actually a complete misreading, I think, of what's happened. The Reserve Bank, in my view, under Governor Lowe, has made a cascading series of major policy missteps going back at least as far as 2019. And when the Reserve Bank cut interest rates to then extraordinarily low levels, historically speaking, even though the unemployment rate was only about 5%, this is in mid-2019, then had no firepower left when the pandemic arrived. Then even after the pandemic effects on the economy proved to be much less severe than had been feared, the Reserve Bank made this, not merely moved the interest rate to cash rate to zero, but made this bizarre commitment to keep interest rates at zero until 2024. Now, the Reserve Bank Governor can try to deny that that was what he did, and you can talk about, comprise words if you like, we are committed to doing this, or it's our firm expectation that we'll do this. That's not a firm promise. But nobody buys that, and certainly it was frequently said in the press that effectively the governor had committed and the board had committed to zero interest rates through to 2024, and you can't get out of that now. And what's more, they were doing that even as, he can't just blame the inflation that's happened, consumer price inflation of the last year. He was making those commitments, he and the board were making those commitments. This time last year, when house prices in Sydney were going up by 30% in a year, the unemployment rate was back down to 5% and on its way down below. And yet it was thinking that it was appropriate to be committing to a 0% cash rate for the next 3 years. That's so far away from what should have been happening to monetary policy in those circumstances. It boggles the mind. So I find it very unconvincing.
Okay, so he's tying himself up. So he's tying himself up in knots, or the RBA is, and the governors on the board of the RBA, in relation to monetary policy. At the same time, we've got this new budget coming under a new government in October. They handle fiscal policy. There's certainly a lot of talk about relief on cost of living. Jim Chalmers said, though, this week there won't be anything more for households beyond what they've announced in childcare and PBS medicines. Now, of course, putting cash out there would also add to the inflation risk. But I have to say, the government's not pulling back on its spending. I went into some detail last night about childcare. We're talking about $10 billion now per annum from taxpayers. They're going to lift the eligibility up to households earning $500,000. Surely this is where the Albanese government needs to have some pressure to bring this under control.
Yes, that particular policy, for example, is madness. And indeed, the government, this is not the current government's fault, but they are facing significant budget deficits still and a situation that's likely to deteriorate. So they actually should be focused at this early stage on trying to get that under control. Would be a terrible mistake to go easy on fiscal policy here, be scared in your first few months, and then they'll have the same problem the Reserve Bank's faced. They're constantly putting off solving problems, and then the problems are much bigger come the time, in the government's case, come the time of the next election.
I think we're losing courage at the RBA and around the budget table in Canberra. Andrew Stone, thank you.